but at the same time, knowing that we're in this together as a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. Gladira.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to engage in this important conversation. I'll start how Deanna started, what brought me here. I have, a passion to connect with people, to provide for a community. And as Deanna mentioned, for the marginalized, elevating voices that have not been heard. I think back, when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think of what planted that seed in me of saying, I'm really interested in really providing diversity, equity, and inclusion, to have a part in that work. And I think of my first experience entering into corporate America in the DMV area, and I was hired, and I was so excited. I said, oh, I did great in my interview. I earned this. And my first evaluation with my supervisor, she says, hey, you turned out to be a good employee. And then it made me realize, oh my God, was I just hired because I was Black? So that planted a seed in me that said, how do we present? How do we really say that having diversity is value, and it is really inclusive practices. That is something that we should be doing. So from that experience, corporate America, to nonprofit, working in Head Start, working with families, and really understanding the value that everyone brings and their different identities, and elevating voices, and public education. Who are we hiring that are going to represent our students, and yeah, elevate their voices. So thank you.
Thank you, Gladira. And Herb.
Yeah, what's going on, everybody? Can folks hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. So yeah, very excited to be here. Herb Alexander. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Cayuga Health System. And I'll just start off with a little bit of my backstory, which leads to why I'm here today. Well, I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, the great state of Michigan, the great city of Detroit. Just gonna put that out there. Through the good and the bad, from sports teams and all that good stuff, we still endure and rep Detroit as best as we can. So I just want to put that out there. But I was, to be honest, I've been in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space really prior to it became an industry or a profession. I think that really happened somewhat recently, where people have viewed it that way. I worked in higher education for about 7-8 years. And to be honest, a lot of the work that I was able to do was growing and developing students to go out into the workforce, right? And so from that, I was able to see and take notes on many of the things folks needed to do to be able to recruit and retain a diverse set of talent. But then also, I think a lot of the things that I would love to leave here today that I learned during that experience before I made the transition to here at Cayuga Health System is diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't like a thing that you do. It's really a concept that you look to incorporate into everything that we do in our different areas, right? And I think a lot of times people say, we try to do diversity, but it's really incorporating and embedding diversity. And so today I'll try to talk about diversity not as an issue or a problem to be solved. I think a lot of times you might hear like the issue of diversity or diversity issues. And I think the idea is we need to change that, right? It's an idea, a concept that's actually a strategy to help us succeed. And so that'll really be the focal point of the conversation I try to bring today. And I think the only way to actually do that is for folks to be encouraged to ask open, clear questions. So I would really hope that folks, if you have a question that you're concerned about asking or not so clear if you should ask that, I would encourage you to do that, because the only way we actually progress forward is an open, candid dialogue. And so I think, I don't want to speak for everyone on the panel, but from what I've seen, folks are more than willing to do that and respond in a candid way. So, but yeah, so that's me, excited to be here, looking forward to the conversation. I know you're on the time, I can talk, so I know you're on the time schedule, so I'll stop and pass it back to Schelley.
We do, and thank you very much. And the very interesting backstories and very valid point around in order to learn and grow, we have to feel safe in asking the questions. It's really important. Ask the questions so we can get honest and authentic answers. So for the panel, I'd just like to know, can you talk a little bit about the social and cultural responsibility of organizations when it comes to DEI? Who would like to go? I'm gonna go with Herb.
Yeah, I'll say, okay, listen, I have no problem. I think the first thing, just to start off, the way I look at organizations, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, is organizations are really living, breathing organisms, right? Like that, they function in that way. And the reason I use that metaphor is because I think the end goal of any organism is to exist in the healthiest way possible. And in order to do that, the first goal is around finances, right? It's a financial stability, whether you're for profit or not for profit, that's a huge goal. And the reason why I bring that up with the question on social and cultural responsibility is there's a business case now more than ever for organizations to invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Like the market is asking for it. They're saying that we won't really invest and participate in your organization unless you're investing and participating in being inclusive. And so there's a business case to that. And also just there's a ton of research that says the more diverse organizations are, the better outcomes they have, right? So I just want to start there. There's a business case to that. Then the social cultural piece, I think as we kind of look at what's happening throughout our community and society, it goes back to what I just said. People are raising their hands saying, hey, how inclusive are you, right? And so as organizations, we have a responsibility to respond to that in a way that includes the people that we serve, right? And I think one of the main points I wrote down is when I say inclusion, I mean being intentional and explicit about including everyone. Because for, I think many centuries, folks didn't think about the entire community when they were trying to be inclusive. They thought of a particular community. And something I heard from somebody one time, they said, if you're not intentionally inclusive, then you're going to be implicitly exclusive. There's no middle ground. You're either including or you're not. And so I think there's a responsibility for us as organizations, especially in Tompkins County in this area, to be inclusive based on how diverse we are as an organization. So I'll stop there and let other folks add to that. But I just wanted to set the tone with that first part.
Yeah, that's a great point, Herb, about being intentional. I mean, it isn't going to just happen. It does require, the effort and a plan. I'm just wondering, Deanna, Gladira, any reaction to what Herb just said, or any other thoughts you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, I just want to add that there's a responsibility for organizations to really serve the people that are, whether it's, the people that are benefiting from the goods or the services. There's a responsibility both on a social standpoint and a, Herb talked about the business standpoint. It is just overall as a in a holistic sense, to serve the community is to really take into account what are the needs, and if there's exclusionary practices, it is just a disservice just overall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good point. And considering all this, I mean, and Deanna, I'll go to you on this. Why is this important right now?
I think that question is to whom? It's always been important to the marginalized. And so to me, that question is a matter of perspective. We talk about safety. One of the things that we have the opportunity to work on at Tompkins County is reimagining public safety. I mentioned that because that is a fiery issue. And I think not mentioning it at all would be inauthentic. The reason why I think the work is so important is because there is a calling for change. And that goes for any place, any time, right? If you go to the hospital, you want to be cared for in a meaningful manner. There shouldn't be, if we were talking about equality and everything being all equal, the healthcare outcomes for minoritized communities would be the same. They are not, and I'm not calling out healthcare, or same thing goes for any service at Tompkins County. Our health department, our mental health department, the outcomes would be the same, but they're not. There are these other disparate impacts that are impacting what we do, and we have to call those things out. Even within our law enforcement systems, we have to address those things. So you say, why is it important? It's always been important, but that circles back to the first question that you asked about the social and cultural responsibility. We are each other's keeper, and if you fundamentally believe that and what that looks like, you will embrace those things. I think this community is in a unique space to be able to address those things because, quote unquote, we say we are progressive, Now, progressive for whom? And I always put those questions at the end of everything I say because it's in the eye of the beholder and how you are experiencing those things. I am no different than, I have the same story as Gladira, the same story as Herb, and I would likely say probably other people on this screen. And so in terms of responsibility, right now, it's who is paying attention. Those folks who are in authority and those power structures are shifting. So there's this unease and tension that is arising from what is happening here. In that it's not a zero-sum game, but that's what is believed. However, that also speaks to our structures and systems of power, both globally, nationally, state, and local, and how that applies across the systems that are embedded across every facet of our work. And so why now? It's why now that it's on the news. I always say marginalized groups are not new to work, right? The people who are disabled, people who actually probably couldn't be on here right now because I don't believe there's transcription. I'm not calling anybody out, but I'm just saying for those who cannot speak, there is a real issue. Reading is not new, right? The ability to, so why now? It's a matter of awareness, alertness. And when you talk about intentionality, I'd roll that back even one step further to say understanding, because you can only be intentional about the things that you understand, that you are learning about. And then to me, that's where the level of accountability comes in to say, if you understand, to know better is to do better, right? Or my mom always says to me, you're always, the rest of your life, she says, you're going to be known for the problems that you solve, or the ones that you created. And I would love to be remembered for being a person that I solved the problems. And so when, again, back to your question of why now, it's really the big question is for the majority of the population, why now? What is your responsibility in that? And I'm not telling you to feel guilt or anything like that. I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm also saying you got to do better. Now that you know, it's all of our responsibility to do better and how you ally in the appropriate ways, right? And that marginalized communities don't continue to lose. That term would be abolished, that there would be no need for a word for a chief equity and diversity officer because we've addressed these problems and that we've normalized marginalized groups in such a way that they are embedded in our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That is a lot to unpack, and I appreciate that. I heard several different things. Definitely this piece about an equity lens, being able to see through the eyes of other than yourselves. Also that organizations are designed to get the results that they get. So if we continue to get results, we need to really look at how we're structured and set up. I guess I'd like to well, first I'll say, is there anything else, anyone else, Gladira? You don't have to at this point, but if there's anything else you want to add, just let me know.
Schelley, can I?
Yes.
I did want to add because I thought that was such good stuff and it had my mind going. So I appreciate what Deanna was saying. So I just got to add to that. I love what she said to begin with. is why is it important now? It's always been important to marginalized communities, right? But it always hasn't been important to everybody. And so I think because of that, the workforce now, especially with millennials and Gen Z, right, which are the dominant and will be the dominant workforce, the folks we're trying to hire, because it wasn't always important to everybody, folks are skeptical. Like, is it actually important right now? And people are asking the question. I mean, if you look at the research, over 70% of Gen Z or Zoomers, as they call them, say that diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations is very important. Like, people are asking that question. And so as we look to recruit, I think we have to be cognizant of that, right? That the folks that we are looking to bring into our workforce are asking that question. If you're not on the front end showing why it is important and how it's important, folks won't choose you to work there. And then the second part is an extension of that workforce is that our community looks that way. When you think about the marginalized and underserved community. So since 2019, research on the census, we have the largest number of same-sex households, so folks who identified LGBTQ plus community, the most BIPOC or non-white folks, right? So where the minority won't be the minority for long, it'll be the majority. People with intellectual and physical disabilities have identified the most in this census, and we're in a global economy in recruitment tool, right? So all of those things are saying the workforce is no longer homogenous. Right, we have to look at the diversity within that. And so I love what Deanna said. It's like, it hasn't always been important to everyone, but now it has to be. And I think that's why now organizations are asking the question. But because of that, we have to actually answer the question with substantial answers to really recruit the workforce we want.
Good. Thank you. And to piggyback on that, so now that we know that it's important, and it's important to everyone now, the business case is made. So what are the most common misconceptions or mistakes that organizations make when trying to recruit and retain a diverse workforce?
So I'll jump on that one.
I
I think
yeah,
I think the first mistake is trying to first, recruit the workforce, but not having done the internal work that is needed to have people identify biases, to establish support systems, start changing the if it's white supremacist systems that are embedded in the culture and the types of ways that organizations operate. That has to be talked about, and it's not it's not an affirmative action. There's affirmative action and there's workforce diversity. So it's not we're hiring these people, check, check, check. We have some faces in here that shows diversity. It's also saying, okay, how are we inclusive? What is the value? What is the need that is the motivation behind having diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also realizing and bringing an understanding, whether that's through additional trainings, that equity is going the extra step, providing extra measures that have not been done in the past in order to provide access and opportunities to those who have been marginalized. So I think there's a lot of internal work that needs to be done while also hiring and the workforce diversity at the forefront.
And Gladira, just as a follow-up, is that also about understanding that everybody may not be on the same how do they say it, playing level, on the same level? So it may require some additional efforts than what we normally do. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Yeah, if this is going to be a change to combat what has been perpetuated, then yeah, there has to be not only some honest conversations as to like what has happened that has supported the status quo, and then what needs to be done to change that, you know, and there's going to be resistance to that because it is a change. And yeah, understanding that not everyone's going to be there at that point, but adopting an organizational mission, you know, and understanding that, okay, this is why we're doing it.
So, thank you, Gladira. I'd like the other two panelists, Herb and Deanna, to answer that question. And also, if you have, if you could sort of talk about where, or the way, give examples of how it's done well.
Okay, look, I'm trying to, told you I can get to going, so I'm trying to wait. Yeah, you want to go first, or?
Okay, let me just tell you both. We are at 10:59.
All right, so it's
So yeah,
AKA speed, make it quick. I got
5 minutes. No, DST, no AKA. Anyway.
So I love what Gladira said. I mean, honestly, it goes to the idea that it's no longer the case if you build it, they will come. Like if you build it, they might come, but if you don't build it right, they definitely won't stay. So you got to make sure that you actually create it in a way that folks want to come and be a part of it. I think that's huge. And I think what organizations that do it well have done is they start off at the baseline of defining what they mean by diversity to their organization, because that's going to be different to everyone. Like, for example, in healthcare and nursing, for example, for us, diversity is men, right? There's not a ton of men in nursing. So for us, we're looking at diversity, men, women of color, people of color, like those things define diversity. So I think what folks might get it wrong and they could get it well, or organizations that do get it well, is they define it first, and then they create the strategy on what they need to do after that. I think the last thing I'll say before I pass is that organizations do well is they don't take the posture of, when it comes to recruitment, well, we posted the job and no one applied, right? We're trying to get people of color, but no one applied. And that's something that we hear all the time. I think the strategy folks that do it well actually take is, or a quick metaphor or analogy was, if I was a fisherman or a fisher person, not to gender it, and I was at the market and the market said, hey, you know, you've only been selling trout for the last 10 years. In order for us to keep buying from you, we need you to diversify it a little bit. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to buy the equipment to be able to catch haddock and tuna and all the good stuff. But I went back to the exact same lake and to the exact same place and casted the same net and said, man, how come I'm not catching anything different? That just wouldn't make sense, right? I would need to go to different places in order to actually recruit and bring what I define as an organization as diversity. And so I think folks that do it well go to where people are and don't just expect people to come to you. So those are the things that I've seen, defining it and then going to folks that have worked. And I would encourage folks, no matter the size of your organization, to try and do.
Excellent. Thank you, Herb. Deanna.
The only thing I would add to that, is to Herb's point, was just to be, before you can recruit, you have to be in right standing with those communities before you ask them to do anything. And so that's the most important thing you do. So one of the things that I've noticed with particularly our colleagues at Tompkins County is that we have folks who are very, very eager, but when they're sometimes in the positions, if it's internally focused colleagues, they don't have the opportunity to interface with other marginalized groups in the way that we would like them to, because you can't create something, a faux workplace that doesn't exist. There's no people there. So what does that look like? So one of the things that I've been working on is looking at partnerships and relationships of what that looks like and who comes in the door. Because again, that's another way of tokenizing people, just because that's what the 10 people of color or 30 people of color are always called on for, quote unquote, Black History Month, always called upon for LGBTQ+, always called upon for veterans services. You know, as again, veterans are a minoritized group, always calling on the same people. They want to be recognized, they want to be acknowledged. That doesn't mean that they want to do the work, you know, because they're already living the life of, they already have those lived experiences. So we talk about recruitment. When I use the term justice, that's being in right standing. So if there are things that need to be adjusted or understood before you recruit colleagues into the workforce, make sure those relationships are there. because it's just like that family member that no one wants that person to keep calling you, right? If you know that they want money, right? So, or if you know that they want something to have, because that's, again, when we talk about diversity, we talk about the business case, I struggle with that language a little bit because it commodifies marginalized people, and they're not just people, you know. However, we have to use language that makes sense to all of us, right? So I understand it from that perspective. So if we could be in right standing and do the marketing and recruitment with our communities, knowing that this is not a one-off, building that reflective, or I know it's not reflective, reflexive relationship where it's two-way communication, actually two-way activity with marginalized community. Going back to the second question, I think she asked about in terms of social cultural responsibility, that's the way to build that workforce.
Thank you. Very, very excellent points. And I can't emphasize more the relationship, how critical building those relationships are, and not at the time that you have the vacancy, but it's ongoing. Recruitment is something that you live and breathe on a daily basis. You're always recruiting. You're always out there looking. So thank you all very much. Very good points. Can you talk from a practical step? What practical steps can organizations implement to start progress in this area? You all have touched on some of this, but is there anything else you can talk to for this audience? Practical steps that organizations can implement to start progress in this area, if you want to summarize what you've said already.
I think one of the practical steps is to look at your hiring process and include, you know, stakeholder buy-in is really important in this process. And as Herb mentioned, Deanna mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion should be embedded in all that we do. So looking at the hiring process and what are areas in that process that create inequitable practices or that, you know, exclude. So whether that's, okay, we're going to look at how we look at applications. What is the screening process like? And then holding, you know, if those that are participating in the screenings and interview committees, if that has been limited to a certain people, then expanding that, including more voices in that process. So I think that's one area that you can immediately start getting buy-in and start seeing changes.
Thank you, Gladira. Anyone else? Herb?
Yeah, I just want to agree with that. I think a good first step is something that we just got finished working on, is to assess where you are, as like do a real deep comprehensive assessment of what you actually are doing well or aren't doing well. And if you can't do that or don't have the expertise to do that internally, maybe partner with other folks who can do that. And then I love what you said about the hiring process. That's right. And starting with things like your job postings, right? Is there inclusive language in that invite folks to the table? Have you looked at job equivalency, right? Do you need to have some of those barriers, like degree barriers for certain jobs, or is that actually creating barriers for folks that don't need to be there, right? I think that's the key first step. And then when you get people looking at things like how inclusive are some of your HR practices. I think HR is a huge place when it comes to retaining folks. So things like, do you have floating holidays that actually honor the religious diversity of folks, right? To look at all of that across the board. And do you have inclusive like time off policies, right? Bereavement for domestic partnerships and not just marriages and things like that, that you can actually look at, review, and then offer to folks. Because people will ask those questions. Like, that's important, especially to our new workforce, Gen Z and millennials. That's key. So I think to sum it up, all those things, assess where you are, definitely in the hiring process, and then surely in some of your policies around and within HR.
Very good. Excellent. Deanna, I see you came off.
Sure. I think another strategy is also knowing when you talk about centering equity or embedding the work, it's a collaborative process. When you talk about assessment, you can only, your data is only as good as what you have. What you don't measure is telling a story. What you do measure and the quality of that, it's also telling a story. So understanding what those metrics mean and how you go about that work is essential. And also measuring against the appropriate benchmarks, I think is really important, but also what is your end goal as an organization? Because sometimes, I can affectionately say, I sometimes I'll foresee myself as something that I am not, and so that's where I think organizations struggle with that because they lose their sense of identity. So as you think about the assessment, making sure that you know who you are and where you intend to be, or what you intend to be as an organization. Again, Covey says, beginning with the end in mind, thinking about those things. But then in addition to that, as you assess those things, I think collaboration is really key in terms of workforce construction, because the Chief Equity and Diversity Officer is one role with for strategic level, but recruitment and that work typically happens in an HR environment. And the Chief Equity and Diversity Officer is not a recruiter. However, they support those functions and embedding all that work across these things, but also they don't provide core services. And so making sure each facet of your organization knows where their area of responsibility. So for example, Tompkins County, we have an HR commissioner that I work really closely with, but also I know if it's the planning department, I need to be with that department head saying, what is it that you intend to do? Or if I'm with the highway department, or if I'm with the Board of Elections or the district attorney's office, all of those things look unique to those things. And so those specific strategies have to be employed. And again, it goes back to relationships. It's only as good as your familiarity with the work. One of the challenges in this work is people are like, we just want to be diverse. What does that mean? Because diversity just simply means representation of what, and the why, and the who, and the how. It means nothing, because a lot of times we'll be saying, we were talking about this before. A lot of people, and again, when I mentioned tokenism before, people were like, well, people can do this work because they're people of color. And I'm like, not all people of color are interested in doing this work, but also it's a professional field. And so as you professionalize the work in terms of what you're doing, that professionalizes the process by which you can recruit, as opposed to tokenizing or marginalizing people further by misusing, I would say, employees in inappropriate ways that may have been well-intentioned, but it's happening the opposite result. When I say, for example, someone will call you for an event and think, oh, this person represents this group, so we want them to do this. This person may not be interested in that. And so understanding where people's areas of influence are, I think, would be fundamentally important as you talk about skill and recruitment strategies.
I want to thank you three. We've just gone over a little bit. We've gone a little bit over, but that's okay. I would like to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have questions, thank you. I was going to say, raise your hand and I'll call you. Cassandra J.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been really helpful and interesting. One of the things that we've been trying to do in our organization is thinking about our relationship in our clients and as in terms of diversity and how we work with our clients. And we're having a problem where some of our existing employees are disengaged with that process. So how do we incentivize existing employees to kind of get on board with DEI?
Excellent question. Panelists.
All right, y'all. All right, I'm gonna go. Listen, if I get to going, Apollo came me off the stage, Schelley. If I go too long. But no, that's a good question. I think to start, without knowing your organization, I think it goes back to what I said before, and I actually appreciate what Deanna said about this with the not loving the language, which is the business case around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think to be honest, it goes back to what I said in the beginning. Organizations exist, even if it's an undertone or if it's explicitly exists, and they need financially to exist. So I think tying that to an outcome that is either has some type of financial impact to say, hey, this actually will help us if we do X, Y, and Z financially is huge. But then the second piece is, I'm going to be honest, a lot of the times we can only influence attitudes so much, right? By education and collaboration. But sometimes you have to put things in place that are behavior-based accountability based that say, wait, we have to do this because it's a priority for our organization. And so I think ways to incentivize that don't get to the accountability piece are education and training, people that can do experiential learning, right? Like if folks can participate in community focus groups or community restorative circles, all those things open people's mind to want to participate. But I think beyond that, you have to kind of set up structures and accountability metrics to have people see it as a priority and value for their work. And then I think then they'll learn the importance. So sometimes you have to push people in that direction and get them to go there.
Can I just add quickly, I think to that too, is that I learned early on, a long time ago, that people tend to go with organizations that they share values with. So having clear values and having a recruitment process that you're hiring people who share those values with you, that's moving forward. But I also think that if it is clear and you have the behavioral pieces in place, that people will either decide they can operate in this environment or they will move on to other places. So is it any other comments from our panel?
I was thinking of three things. So first thing is, being part of the process, right? Especially if you're implementing, DEI focus. It's sort of like, I think of when someone creates a presentation for me and wants me to then present it. I'm disengaged at it's like, what? I didn't create these slides. So that's the first thing, and it doesn't talk to the behavior, right, or the biases. So as involved as you can have these people in the process in creating the language, as Herb said, that's really important. Identifying biases. So sometimes we've had to create affinity groups where it allows people spaces to say what they really feel without, if it's okay, a white affinity group, they can say certain things that they can't say when people of color are around, and vice versa, so working through those biases, which would then clear up provide a level of deepening of understanding of why maybe they're disengaged. And the third is change is hard. So, eventually, you adopt and implement and are consistent. If certain people are against that, they're going to move on. But yes.
I think another just piece to that, just to add to, is accountability to what you believe in. I think people become disillusioned and disenfranchised because, I think we've all heard the term lip service, or things sometimes they feel like the work is given, lip service is given to the work. And so you lose everyone in that process. You not only lose the marginalized populations, you lose the majority population as well, because there's no stake and there's no buy-in. And so there are no repercussions for living outside of the organizational values and what we uphold. And so I think that's a difficult part of the conversation, because then, the critique of that is this is being crammed down, the organization, but then on the flip side of those other colleagues who've been here are still, echoing, we've been here, we're calling for a place, a seat at the table, and what that looks like. And so I think accountability is probably one of the most important things, accountability measures in an organization as a strategy. Once you define your goal, making sure that there are consequences for but good consequences for things you do well, but also consequences when you're not living up to expectations and following through. Because I think that's the hardest thing that people experience. And so when you feel like, for example, here's an example, when the verdict of George Floyd's murder was read, I know that talking to my colleagues of color, everybody was holding their breath with, holding with bated breath. Is this going to be a guilty verdict? It's because there is distrust in the system, not because everybody saw this thing on 9 for 9 minutes and how many seconds that it was clear as day that this is what happened, you know, and people were standing around watching this, you know, atrocity. But because the system, they feel like the system has failed, blackmails time and time again is what you see. So goes your organization, right? As employees, if you see that your organization continues to not live up to whatever those expectations are, and there are no mechanisms for accountability, these are the outcomes that come from that. And so it's hard to recruit and retain anybody, you know, in those conditions. And so strong accountability, I can't advocate for those more. And I always think about accountability. That can be a good thing, praise. That can be saying, we caught you doing something well. And other people from a place of fear that comes, well, if I don't do this right, then X, Y, and Z will happen to me.
Great. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, I see. Is it Allie?
Yep, Allie Evans. Good to see
Okay.
you.
Allie.
Hi. Part of this to me seems like, going back to what you said, Schelley, at the very beginning, creating the safe space for this progression of thinking and doing and being as part of the values, as part of the process, because change takes time. We're all humans. If your values and your culture is about being together and coming together in some of these things in, you know, the Fisher person story, the whole idea of there's reasons for this. It's not just about, but being safe in your space to think and be and grow together, I think is important. And it speaks to me from what you said at the beginning. Is there any advice in this particular focus for the safe space creation?
Great question.
I think defining parameters, I'll go first this time. Okay. So I think defining parameters of what a safe space is and what it is not, you know, because I understand that from a CEO's perspective, when you think about these things, you're trying to constantly curate or make sure that everybody in the workforce understands the position, you know, of why you're doing things, you know, because I know that if everybody gets that complaint email, why are you doing this? This is creating an unfair advantage. I mean, you hear it all, right? In this work. And so defining what it is and what it is not in terms of safe space and why it's important, I think is absolutely critical. But then also identifying what the goal is in mind, and also empowering the leadership through whatever that marginalized group is, or whatever group it is, you know, if we're talking about an affinity group, something like that, making sure that they know that they're in charge. It is not that here is the organizational like values, this is what we have to adhere to from a framework perspective, but also you create your own space and what this looks like in terms of your confines, knowing that we know that it's a workplace that everybody's professional, assuming all of these professional standards will occur, you know, within the work, but also saying is you're not going to be targeted because you communicated X, Y, and Z, you know, within this space, as long as you're within the organizational values, you know, and so setting those boundaries for what is and what is not, I think is absolutely critical. And then from there, knowing what the end goal is this a long-term thing or is this to achieve a specific goal? And also knowing when those things are creating value or they're harming, you know, the organizational culture. Because I think everybody's at one point started a group or something like that, and then you felt like this has lost focus. So monitoring to make sure that they continue to be on schedule and on track. And what I mean by on track is, are we achieving the goal that we hope for? That's what I mean by that. Not being, you know, heavy-handed with people, but also being firm in that it's a privilege, whatever organization, anybody out here, it's a privilege to wherever people are working, wherever you are, you know, like whether it's Cayuga Health System, I'm just saying that because Martin was right in front of me on my screen, or if it's the school district or any other place here, city of Ithaca, whatever that looks like, it's an honor to serve, understanding that. And then because of that, because we value you, we value these things, we are creating these safe opportunities for you to do this, to have these conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just be quick. I think whenever I agree with all of that, and I think whenever I hear that specific question about a safe space, I always think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you look at the psychological and they work up, and the ones that really stand out to me are belonging, and then right above that is esteem. And I think that was definitely intentional because belonging leads to that esteem, and that's when people start to like really feel safe because there are many ways that we communicate belonging that aren't verbal or intentional. They're just kind of subtle, right? Like without saying you belong, there's certain things that we do and don't do that say that, right? Like how many of us here look for things like curb cuts when we're going into a building, right? But there's so many people who do. When you think about people living with physical disabilities and all those small things that communicate belonging. But even when you're in things like meetings, right? One of the things that stands out to me all the time that's implicit, and it happened not too long ago in our space, is when like somebody who's of a marginalized group, you're in a meeting, and people can probably nod to this when they hear this and say, I've experienced that. Like someone will make a comment or statement or have a good idea in the beginning, and then 5 minutes it will work away around to a male or a white male, and they'll say the same thing. And people are like, oh, you know what, Bob, that's a great idea. And you're sitting there thinking, damn, did I just say that? You know what I mean? Did I just bring that up? But things like that so often communicate belonging, and that affects esteem, right? And how people feel safe. Because what happens over time is that wears you down and you don't want to speak up. So as people in oftentimes influential or authority positions, it's key for us when we see things like that, right, to intervene and speak out to help people really want to belong and feel safe. Like in that situation, I might say, yeah, Jane, didn't you just say something like that a second ago? You know? And so I think back to that safety piece, it's really centered on belonging and esteem. And that's when people really and truly feel safe. You know?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. I know that Martin has a question. Did you want to ask?
Sure. I have access to Herb, which is a privilege, I believe, true professional, and I would appreciate him, but I wanted to get him collaborating with the other panelists around a question that I have. And the question is, maybe there's 2 points to make my question fully. One is this work, one of the things I appreciate is it is an investment. And someone made the point of it being an area of professional expertise. And I think both of those two realizations we had at Cayuga Health, but implicit in that is it does require an investment. And I'll observe that our panelists come from rather large institutions. And one of the things I wonder is about the wherewithal that it takes to do this well, to engage professionals that are able to point out blind spots. And so my question for the panel with all of that is, to what extent do larger organizations with wherewithal to tackle this challenge have an obligation or an opportunity to collaborate amongst each other or extend what could be a service to smaller organizations? And so I don't have an answer for that. It's a true question. It's something I've spoken with Herb about. So I'd love to hear others' perspective on that.
Can I just say a little bit? I'm sorry, not on the panel, but when you asked the question, it made me think of something that took place many, many years ago when the city, the school district, and the county came together. Their elected officials sort of came together and were doing work around DEI. And out of that came, and we were specifically talking about recruitment and retention. And we realized at that time, we all had the same interests and needs, and we just felt if we sort of collaborated, maybe we could have a greater impact. So out of that came the Diversity Consortium of Tompkins County, which is a group made up of affiliates from all over the county. Many not-for-profits, which are very small, who just don't have the capacity and the resources. So this is a way that they can tap into and the expertise. We have, the larger institutions, Cornell, the school district, Ithaca College, the county, the city are all there and represented. So when you were asking your question, it just made me think of that example that is live and well right here in the community. And over the years, Cornell has in the past taken a really leadership role with the consortium and sharing a lot of their resources. And I see that happening with the other groups too. So in terms of, and the reality is when we recruit people into this area, we don't just recruit them to our workplaces, we recruit them to the community. And it takes not only what's going on well in the workplace to keep and retain people, but their social experience in the community. So having a way to address and deal with those things, we do it through the Diversity Consortium, but that's essential and necessary and absolutely required. So I'm sorry, I will let my panelists, this is their job. Go ahead.
No, that's awesome. And Schelley, I just wanted to add on to that. You know, in the school district, we have EILC, the Equity Inclusion Leadership Council, and it's composed of people of different organizations within Ithaca, really giving their inputs and expertise to diversity, equity, inclusion, family engagement, and there's a great collaboration there. I also think of, as you were saying, you know, it's not only welcoming people and creating, you know, that safe space, like someone was saying, within the workplace, but letting them know that there is a community outside. I think of the First Fridays that Cassie does, and we've collaborated with. So there is a lot of power in, especially in this area, bringing together organizations and collaborating in efforts to move forward this work.
One of my goals, literally in my job as part of accountability areas, is to raise awareness and build alliances with other community partners, let's say. So what does that look like? It looks different because right now I am one person within the county, knowing the county covers all these different places. I don't have any direct reports. However, I do have influence in these areas to make change. What that looks like is, and so to your point, Martin, you're asking about what is our responsibility. We absolutely see it as having a responsibility. So what I've done is done some different trainings, different like reviewing documents, strategic planning information. I've worked with different students at different universities to do some of this work over the last like a little less than 2 years. And so knowing that I didn't even scratch the surface, because it needs to be a contagion and it needs to be more work, but we absolutely see that as work, something needs to be done. But then also from the county perspective, we realize that, again, as Herbs Valley as an organism, we need to do our own work first, from the perspective of we can't ask our residents to commit to something or be a part of something that we're not bought into. And so that was a really, really deliberate space, but the call has been great from the community. Once they realized they had hired this role, what does this look like, asking for support and assistance. And so I've done lots of different work with different community partners around building capacity and saying yes to just about everything that they asked for. Like, for example, I was teaching a class a couple of weeks ago at Cornell to public students in their MPA program about public service and the work of DEI, and doing that there, but then also going to small nonprofits and doing sessions there, or even if it's just the day-to-day of we're having a problem with your service, you know, here we're having a problem with, just an example, the probation department or the mental health department, going to that agency explicitly and say, what is the issue here? How do we connect and make this better? So that is absolutely within our charge and our responsibility.
And I think we accidentally lost Schelley too. So I'm gonna answer that and then maybe pass it to Jen, or just try to freestyle the facilitation. But no, that was and that's a good thought of things that we have thought about for sure. And I like what Schelley said, there's a diversity consortium in Tompkins County. There are other things happening where we all can collaborate. And I think specifically for larger institutions like ourselves, like this could be our responsibility and should be our responsibility. Historically, the larger institutions have the opportunity to offer the most help, but also it's because they've probably caused the most harm, right? Whether it be explicitly or implicitly, just being honest, right? And we're a part of that, to be fully transparent. And so I think in many ways, we have a responsibility to create access for other smaller organizations. So, and a small example might be, I know the Diversity Consortium, we're a part of that. It will be within our responsibility to say, for other organizations that can't afford the affiliate dues, let's help foot the bill for a few folks that can actually do that. And if Cornell, the county, Cayuga Health could do that, then to invite more folks in so they can have access to the knowledge education, that's something that we should be able to do. Or we might say, and I'll frame this with this work, the reason why we have chief diversity officers or equity, diversity, and inclusion officers is because the work should be everyone's work, but to start off, somebody has to be accountable for it or it won't get done, or would have already have been done. So that's the reason why we have jobs. And so if folks in smaller organizations can't actually afford that, then like Deanna was saying, then it's up to us to say, hey, for either for free in kind or for a small cost, we could come help set that up for folks, right? Because that's hard work to do. And it takes assessment and research and investment because we didn't get here overnight. So we won't change it overnight. And so I think that's a key opportunity for larger organizations to help and create access for other organizations that don't have that ability to. Schelley,
Thank you.
Can I jump in for a second? Monique has had her hand up for forever. I just feel like we need to call her. So can we call it?
And can I just apologize here because we had a power outage at City Hall, so I got booted out. I apologize. Yes, Monique, I'm so sorry.
And I'm gonna laugh at that because that happened to me all the time. My hand gets caught in my bookshelf because it's the brown hand. So you're trying to be inclusive and then it gets hidden. So yeah, sorry about that.
That's fine. Actually, I think that I probably have a million questions that I, of course, will not ask here. But I think that my bigger one was actually just answered, which was kind of going through like what resources there are in order to recruit representative like talent and also like board members and committee members and such, because I work for a nonprofit and that's a consistent thing. But that was addressed, so I'm good.
Thank you, Monique. Thanks for your patience. Sarah.
Hi, so my question is around how to navigate DEI work internally when it's sort of like a staff-led initiative. We have a recently formed DEI committee, and we are sort of trying to figure out what the outcome of that is. The committee was formed without us, like there was no decision from on high as to like what the goal was. The space was given for us to identify for ourselves what we thought we might propose to the organization, what the goal might be. So we've been given a lot of autonomy in that regard, but sometimes having that much autonomy can mean that you don't have like the comfort of specific parameters. So what advice do you have for a DEI committee that has that sort of flexibility?
What does your, I guess I have a question back. What is your DEI committee assigned to do? Because to me, that's a really global question. It's kind of like when someone, it feels, when we get those questions, we're charged with specific content expertise. And so when we get those questions about DEI, that could be anything, because if you're infusing it in all aspects of your work, that could be, will you tell me that, are you with the Tompkins chamber or your chamber?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So at the chamber, that could be an internal or external function, right? As an organization, or it can be a hybrid. It could be, are you talking about infusing DEI in your policies, process, and procedures? Are you talking about recruitment and retention? Are you talking about recruiting diverse businesses? Are you talking about making sure communities, diverse communities feel included, they have access? So I could think of 100 questions to ask back to the DEI question. So I think one clarifying mission, vision, values, or I always try to say short in a very succinct way, the who, what, when, where, how, and why. If you answer those questions, that will help frame the discussion for whatever it is that you intend to do, but then also having that shared commitment around whatever the DEI group is, knowing that what you're describing, Sarah, is not uncommon, and that there's a mandate from somewhere, right? Where someone's created something and you're like, well, how did this happen? How are we including how is this continue to support the current power structure, or how are we reducing those things, or how are we aligning those things? And so again, it may be a difficult discussion, but again, it's not uncommon. It's unfortunate, but sometimes, but that's not an abnormal thing. Then I would pose those questions, but then also asking what the autonomy and authority is of this group, clarifying whether this is a recommendation or suggestion, or is there real autonomy and authority to make change? But then also asking what accountability measures exist, and how does that align with current policy and procedures in the work? So that's just that's what I would ask before, without having any other concrete content around this.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think I should provide more context, or do the other panelists feel like they have enough to weigh on with?
No, I mean, Gladira, you go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna add real quick, you know, with what Deanna was saying, you know, it's important to be intentional and what you hope to get out of that that group or committee. So really identifying, and I think Deanna, you know, you described that really well, or went through, you know, the questions that need to be asked. But, you know, if it's, hey, we're gonna work on hiring more this, or we're gonna work on creating a new hiring process, being very intentional on that, so that there's direction.
Yeah, I think that's right on point. And I would say too, I know we don't have a ton of time left, but just the work that you do, whatever that group, once you define what you're charged to do, I think the actual programs or initiatives that come from that should be like with the end in mind, like Deanna was saying, and that they should be with the idea of we're trying to get an investment into this, right? Like if folks are doing it in their like spare time, in-kind time, that's not true commitment into what folks are looking to do, you know? And if that's not there, then the results will be minimal at best, just because there's not a ton of commitment into that. And I know I love analogies. The thing I usually say is, well, actually, I'll save the analogy for the next time, just so we can have somebody else can ask another question. But yeah, I would say the investment piece is huge. And so whatever you all decide to do, you should look at how can we get some investment, tangible investment into what we're trying to do so we can make real impact in the long term.
Thank you, Herb. We have, Sarah has a question. This will be our last question, and there is 3 minutes to answer it. Go ahead.
I just asked my question and they answered it, so I will lower my hand. Thank you all.
So okay, thank you. Sorry about that. That was on me. Thank you. So we're coming to an end. I really want to thank the panelists. As I said, our distinguished panelists for being here. I think a lot of information seems like valuable information, at least from the chat, that people had. I heard a lot of things. What I remember is, you know, really, this is not a program. We're not talking about a program. This is something that needs to be in the fabric of our existence, and we live and breathe it. It's there all the time. You have to be clear about what the goals are that you're trying to accomplish. And we really need to look internally, look at ourselves in our organizations before we think about bringing people in. Are we ready? Is our organization ready? What are the things we need to do in order to get ready? We need to put the structures and the systems need to be in place. And collaborations are critical. Collaborations and building relationships. And this is an investment. It's an investment that, if done right, will pay off very well. So, any closing comments from our panelists? Quickly, and I'm not sure, is Jennifer still here? I don't see her.
I'm gonna summarize us.
Oh, probably. Okay. So
yeah, go ahead.
I have one call out wherever I go. I hope, ask for a commitment. Commit to doing one thing differently tomorrow. In the organization. If you have infrastructure, like in Herb, I'm saying Martin, because I think you're in charge there, you do something different. I'm calling everybody here, not just you. So push it forward, whatever that is, you know, and I'm Tompkins County, I call myself out, the city chamber, anybody who's on the screen, please commit to doing something different, not just different for the sake of doing different, apply something that you heard. Please don't let this be like probably 90% of the things that we hear. I will jokingly say, I go to church every Sunday, but by the time I walk out the door, I may have lost 90% of what I heard. And so how do we do that different? How do we apply what it is that we heard? How do we not, a year from now, if we're so fortunate to have this conversation again, what steps can we say that we have taken to move us to the next level? How do we say Tompkins County, when I mean Tompkins County as organization, I mean Tompkins County, all of us who are here together are making a difference? And how do we know that our numbers, we move the needle in a meaningful way because we did the work. And so I just charge all of you with at least one thing to commit to doing better and holding yourself accountable for achieving whatever that is.
Thank you, Deanna.
Thank you so much to our panelists and to Schelley Michell-Nunn for facilitating. On behalf of the chamber, I appreciate everyone who took time to attend the session today and participate in the Q&A. And also those of you who are taking the time to watch it after the fact. This will be posted on our YouTube channel, and then next week we'll be sending out an email in the Chambergram with recorded sessions from all of our Workforce Week sessions. And then our final Workforce Week event will be a happy hour at Liquid State with Silo Food Truck on Friday at 4 o'clock. So if you joined us for any of these, and especially if you want to continue the conversation and check in with any of the presenters or your fellow participants, that's going to be a really nice opportunity to kind of wrap up all the things we've learned this week. So thank you again for all of you for joining us.
Thank you.